A young couple buys a crumbling old house, dreaming of turning it into their forever home. But during renovations, they uncover a hidden compartment beneath the stairs, containing old photographs, strange symbols, and a sealed box that seems to whisper when touched. As they investigate the home's history, they realize it once belonged to a family that mysteriously vanished decades ago. Each discovery draws them deeper into a chilling secret that blurs the line between past and present and reveals that some houses remember everything. The photographs show children playing in the same rooms where the couple now sleeps. The symbols match markings found carved into the basement walls. And the box continues to emit sounds that grow louder each night, as if something inside is trying to communicate across decades of silence. But what happens when they finally decide to open it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway of what would become their dream home, her architect's eye taking in every sagging beam and cracked window with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The Victorian house on Maple Street had been built in 1943, its bones solid despite decades of neglect. Beside her, James adjusted his tool belt and whistled low at the scope of work ahead. "You sure about this, Sarah?" he asked, though his contractor's hands were already itching to begin the restoration. "Look past the damage," she said, pulling out the house deed they'd signed just hours earlier. The previous owners' names caught her attention: Robert and Mary Hartwell, who had owned the property from 1952 to 1978. Strange that they'd held onto it for so long before selling. "See the crown molding, the original hardwood floors, the way the light falls through those tall windows." James nodded, his practical mind already calculating materials and timelines. At 28, he'd built a reputation for bringing historical homes back to life, and this 1940s Victorian represented his biggest challenge yet. Sarah's architectural training complemented his hands-on skills perfectly. They'd renovated 3 smaller properties together since their wedding 2 years ago. The real estate agent had been unusually eager to close the deal, mentioning that several previous buyers had backed out at the last minute. Something about cold feet and changed circumstances. The price reflected these failed sales, suspiciously low for a house with such strong architectural bones in Millfield's historic district. Their first day of actual work began with James examining the staircase that led to the second floor. The third step creaked ominously under weight, and the handrail showed signs of structural weakness. As he pried up the damaged boards, Sarah sorted through boxes in what had been the living room, noting how the afternoon light revealed layers of wallpaper from different decades. "Sarah, come look at this," James called from the staircase. She found him kneeling beside the open step, his flashlight illuminating a space that shouldn't exist. Behind the damaged wood lay a hidden compartment, roughly 2 feet square, carved into the structural support beneath the stairs. "Did you know this was here?" he asked. Sarah shook her head, studying the craftsmanship. Someone had deliberately created this hiding space, taking care to make it invisible from casual observation. The compartment contained a collection of items wrapped in oiled cloth, clearly placed there with intention to preserve them. James carefully extracted the bundle. Inside, they found a stack of black and white photographs. Several pages covered with strange symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal, and a wooden box about the size of a jewelry case, sealed with old wax around its edges. The photographs showed the house in different time periods, some clearly from the 1950s, based on the clothing and furniture visible in the background. One image made Sarah's breath catch, a family portrait taken in their current living room, showing parents and 3 children standing exactly where she and James now stood. "The Hartwells," she murmured, recognizing the formal poses typical of family photography from that era, but it was the sealed box that commanded their attention. As James held it up to the light, they both heard it, a soft sound, almost like whispered voices emanating from within. The sound grew slightly louder when James moved the box closer to them, as if responding to their presence. "That's impossible," Sarah said. Though she'd heard it clearly, James set the box carefully on the floor, and the whispering faded to barely audible levels. When he picked it up again, the sounds returned, definitely originating from inside the sealed container. "Maybe there's a music box mechanism inside," he suggested. Though his voice carried doubt, Sarah examined the symbols on the loose pages. They weren't random drawings. Each symbol appeared to be carefully constructed, with precise angles and curves that suggested meaning rather than decoration. Some symbols appeared multiple times across different pages, arranged in patterns that felt intentional. "These look like they might be some kind of protective markings," she said, her architectural training giving her an eye for deliberate design elements. The late afternoon sun was fading as they gathered their discoveries and secured the house for the night. Tomorrow they would begin proper research into the Hartwell family and their mysterious abandonment of these carefully hidden items. As they locked the front door, both Sarah and James noticed the sealed box had grown slightly warmer during the time they'd handled it, and the whispered sounds seemed to follow them even after they'd wrapped it back in its protective cloth. The drive home to their apartment was unusually quiet, both lost in thoughts about what they'd discovered and what it might mean for their renovation project. The next morning, Sarah and James spread the photographs across their kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. In the clear light of day, the images revealed details they'd missed in the dim staircase compartment. The family portrait that had caught Sarah's attention showed the house's living room exactly as they'd seen it yesterday, but furnished in 1950s style. A man and woman stood behind 3 children, 2 older kids flanking a toddler who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. The parents appeared to be in their 30s, the father wearing a suit despite the casual home setting, the mother in a floral dress typical of the era, but it was what Sarah noticed in the background that made her hands tremble as she held the photograph. Behind the family, barely visible in the shadows near the staircase, stood another figure. The image was too blurred to make out features, but the silhouette definitely didn't belong to anyone in the posed family group. "James, look at this." She pointed to the shadowy form. "There's someone else in this picture." James squinted at the photograph, tilting it toward the window light. "It could be a reflection, or maybe the camera picked up movement from someone walking by. No, look at the positioning. This person is standing still, deliberately in the background. And see how the shadow falls? It's not consistent with the lighting in the rest of the room." They examined the other photographs methodically. Several showed the children playing in different rooms of the house, the boy tossing a baseball in what was now their planned master bedroom, the girl reading in a window seat that still existed in the front parlor, the toddler playing with wooden blocks on the kitchen floor. Each image captured normal family life, but Sarah's trained eye for spatial relationships detected something unsettling about the compositions. In every photograph that showed multiple rooms or doorways, there seemed to be additional shadows, shapes that didn't quite belong to the visible occupants. "It's like someone was always watching them," she murmured. James had been studying a photograph that showed the exterior of the house. "Sarah, look at this one. See the windows on the second floor?" The image showed several upstairs windows, most with curtains pulled back to let in light. But 2 windows, side by side, had curtains drawn tightly closed, despite the apparent bright day when the photo was taken. "Those are the windows to what we planned as the nursery," Sarah realized. "Why would they keep those rooms dark?" James flipped through more exterior shots, finding 3 taken from different angles around the house. In each one, the same 2 windows remained curtained and dark, while all other windows showed signs of normal habitation. "Maybe those rooms were unused," he suggested, "but why photograph them if they were empty? Every other shot shows lived-in spaces." Sarah pulled out her laptop and began researching the architectural history of their house. Property records showed it had been built in 1943 by Edgar Thornfield, who'd lived there alone until his death in 1951. The Hartwell family had purchased it the following year. "That's odd," she said, reading from the screen. "Edgar Thornfield died of what the records call unexplained circumstances. No other details given." James was examining the photographs with a magnifying glass he'd retrieved from his toolkit. "Sarah, I think these children might have been trying to document something. Look at how carefully some of these shots are composed." He showed her a photograph taken from the kitchen doorway, angled to capture both the living room and the base of the staircase. The composition seemed deliberate, as if the photographer wanted to record the spatial relationship between these specific areas. "This isn't casual family photography," Sarah agreed. "Someone was documenting the house itself, not just the people in it." The sealed box sat at the center of their table, and throughout their examination of the photographs, both had noticed the whispered sounds growing more distinct. What had been barely audible murmurs the day before now carried the clear cadence of human voices, though the words remained indecipherable. James picked up the box, and immediately the whispers intensified. Sarah leaned closer, trying to make out individual voices. "There are definitely children speaking," she said. "At least 2 different voices, maybe 3. The realization hit them simultaneously. The voices matched the number of children in the family portrait. "That's impossible," James said, though he didn't put the box down. Sarah reached out to touch the sealed wax around the box's edges. The moment her finger made contact, the whispers stopped entirely, as if whoever was inside was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The Millfield Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the town's main street, its rooms filled with carefully preserved artifacts from the area's past. Sarah and James arrived that afternoon, carrying copies of the photographs, hoping to learn more about the mysterious Hartwell family. Mrs. Evelyn Cross, the Society's elderly librarian, greeted them with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely received visitors interested in local history. At 78, she possessed the kind of institutional memory that made her invaluable to researchers seeking information about the town's past. "The Hartwells," she repeated when Sarah showed her the family portrait. "Oh my, I haven't thought about them in years." "Such a tragedy." "Tragedy?" James asked. Mrs. Cross led them to a reading table surrounded by filing cabinets containing decades of local newspaper archives. "They disappeared in 1978. The whole family vanished overnight without a trace." She retrieved a manila folder from a nearby cabinet. Extracting a yellowed newspaper clipping dated September 15, 1978, the headline read, "Local family vanishes without trace, Robert." "Hartwell was an accountant at the bank," Mrs. Cross explained as they read. "Mary taught piano lessons from their home. They had 3 children. Tommy was 12, Lisa 10, and little Michael had just turned 3. The newspaper article provided few details beyond confirming the family's sudden disappearance. Neighbors had noticed the house dark for several nights before someone thought to check on them. Police found the house unlocked, with dinner still on the table and the children's toys scattered around as if they'd been playing normally. No signs of struggle, no packed belongings, no note, Mrs. Cross continued. It was like they simply stepped out of their lives and never returned. Sarah studied the newspaper photograph accompanying the article. The same family portrait they'd found in the hidden compartment, but reproduced in grainy newsprint. What did people think happened to them? Theories ranged from financial troubles to family disputes, but Robert's bank accounts were untouched, and everyone described them as a loving, stable family. The police investigation went nowhere. James leaned forward. "Did anyone ever live in the house after they disappeared?" Mrs. Cross nodded slowly. "Several families tried over the years, but none stayed long. There were always complaints, strange noises, cold spots, feelings of being watched. Most people attributed it to the house's tragic history, but what?" Sarah prompted. "I visited the house once in 1983, 5 years after the disappearance. The Morrison family had been living there for about 6 months. Mrs. Morrison was convinced she heard children playing in the empty rooms upstairs. The elderly librarian pulled out another folder, this one containing what appeared to be rental agreements and tenant complaints. I started documenting the reports after the third family moved out. Look at this. She showed them a handwritten note from 1985. We can't stay another night. The children won't stop crying, but there are no children here. Another report from 1991. Found toys in rooms we'd cleaned out completely. Same toys appearing night after night. And from 1996, something in this house wants us gone. We can feel it watching us, waiting for us to leave. How many families lived there? James asked. 14 different tenants between 1978 and 2018, when the house was finally taken off the rental market. The longest anyone stayed was 8 months. Most left within 6 weeks. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Mrs. Cross, in your opinion, what do you think happened to the Hartwell family? The elderly woman was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs spread before them. I think something in that house was very wrong, and the Hartwells knew it. I think they tried to do something about it, and whatever they attempted went terribly wrong. What kind of something? James pressed. There were rumors about the house even before the Hartwells bought it. Edgar Thornfield, the original owner, was known to be interested in unusual subjects, spiritualism, occult practices. When he died in 1951, some people whispered it wasn't natural causes. She pulled out one final document, Edgar Thornfield's death certificate. Under cause of death, someone had written unexplained cardiac event, but then crossed it out and written unknown causes. The Hartwells bought that house knowing its history, Mrs. Cross concluded, and I believe they paid a price for trying to make it right. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Cross touched Sarah's arm gently. Dear, if you're planning to live in that house, please be careful. Some places hold on to their secrets too tightly to ever let them go. The next morning, James descended into the basement with his contractor's flashlight and a growing sense of unease. The basement had seemed ordinary during their initial house inspection, but Mrs. Cross's warnings about Edgar Thornfield's occult interests made him want to examine the foundation more carefully. The basement walls were constructed of fieldstone and mortar typical of 1940s construction, but as James swept his light across the surfaces, he noticed irregularities in the stonework. Several stones bore marks that definitely weren't natural formations or construction scratches. In the northeast corner, carved deep into one of the foundation stones, was an intricate symbol, matching one from the pages they'd found in the hidden compartment. The carving was precise, deliberate, and appeared to have been made with considerable effort given the hardness of the stone. James called Sarah down, and together they systematically examined every wall surface. What they discovered made their blood run cold. The symbols weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern around the basement's perimeter, each one carefully positioned at specific intervals. Sarah, look at this, James said, tracing the carved lines with his finger. These symbols were carved from inside the basement, not outside. Sarah studied the tool marks, her architectural training helping her understand construction techniques. You're right. Someone was down here carving these from this side of the wall. But why would you carve protection symbols facing inward? They found 13 symbols total, each one different, but clearly part of a coordinated design. The symbols appeared to be some form of binding or containment pattern, suggesting that whatever the Hartwell family had been trying to protect against was already inside the house. James, we need to check the rest of the house, Sarah said, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. Over the next 2 hours, they searched every room methodically. Sarah's trained eye caught what casual observers would miss: subtle symbols carved into window frames, hidden behind furniture placement, etched into the backs of built-in cabinets. In the children's bedrooms, they found symbols carved into the closet door frames, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. The master bedroom revealed symbols etched into the headboard area of the wall, positioned where they would be hidden by a bed. But it was in the kitchen, where they made the most unsettling discovery. Behind the pantry, carved into the wall at child height, were symbols that appeared to have been made by much smaller hands. The carving was shakier, less precise, as if done by someone young and frightened. "The children helped with this," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the crude but unmistakable symbols. "They were all working together to create some kind of protective barrier." James pulled out his phone and photographed each symbol they'd found. When he uploaded the images to his laptop and arranged them according to their positions in the house, a clear pattern emerged. "Sarah, look at this. The symbols form a complete circuit around the house's interior. Every entrance, every window, every potential access point is marked. But if they were trying to keep something out, why didn't it work?" Sarah asked. "Maybe they weren't trying to keep something out," James realized with growing horror. "Maybe they were trying to keep something in." The implications hit them both simultaneously. The Hartwell family hadn't been protecting themselves from an external threat. They'd been trying to contain something that was already present in their home, something that had been there since Edgar Thornfield's time, something that his death hadn't eliminated. That evening, as they sat in their apartment, reviewing their photographs and research, the sealed box began exhibiting new behavior. The whispers had become more distinct, and now they could clearly hear what sounded like children's voices calling for help. "Mommy, where are you?" came a small voice, so clear it might have been in the room with them. "It's dark in here," said another voice, higher and younger. "Please help us," whispered a third voice, barely audible but unmistakably desperate. Sarah and James stared at the box in shock. The voices were no longer just sounds. They were communications, pleas for assistance from children who somehow remained trapped within that sealed container. "The symbols," Sarah said suddenly. What if the Hartwells tried to bind whatever was threatening them, but something went wrong? What if they accidentally trapped their own children instead? James picked up the box, and immediately the children's voices became more urgent, more desperate. They weren't just calling for help. They were calling for their parents, for someone to free them from whatever prison the failed ritual had created. The horrible truth was becoming clear. The Hartwell children hadn't disappeared with their parents. They were still in the house, trapped by the very symbols meant to protect them. Sarah spent the following morning at the county records office, tracking down every family that had attempted to live in the Hartwell house over the past 4 decades. The rental applications and lease agreements painted a disturbing pattern of rapid departures and increasingly desperate escape clauses. Her breakthrough came when she found a rental application from 1982 signed by David Chen. Unlike the other brief records, this application included a forwarding address and phone number that had been updated multiple times over the years, suggesting Mr. Chen had maintained contact with the property management company long after his departure. That afternoon, Sarah dialed the California number with trembling fingers. A man's voice answered on the third ring, cautious and tired. "Mr. Chen, this is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling about the house on Maple Street in Millfield that you rented in 1982. A long silence followed. When David Chen finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades-old trauma. "I wondered when someone would call about that place. Are you living there now? My husband and I are renovating it. We've found some unusual things." "Get out," David said immediately. "Whatever you've found, whatever you think you can fix or understand, you can't. Get out while you still can." Sarah pressed gently for details, and slowly, David Chen's story emerged. He had been 26 in 1982, a graduate student looking for affordable housing while working on his master's thesis. The rent on the Hartwell house had been suspiciously low, but David attributed that to its remote location and dated decor. "The first week was normal," he explained. "I was working long hours, barely home except to sleep. But then I started hearing them." "Hearing what?" "Children playing, upstairs in the empty rooms. I'd go up to check, thinking maybe neighborhood kids had gotten inside somehow, but the rooms were always empty. Just the sound of footsteps running around, laughter, voices calling to each other. David's voice grew quieter as he continued. The second week I started finding toys. A baseball glove in the kitchen, wooden blocks stacked into towers in the living room, children's books open on tables I'd cleared the night before. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Did you try to figure out where they were coming from? I thought someone was playing a prank. I changed the locks, checked every window, even set up a camera system. But the toys kept appearing, and the camera never showed anyone bringing them. What made you leave? David was quiet for so long, Sarah thought the connection had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. The third week, I found a note, handwritten in a child's careful printing, "The children. They're still here." That note is mentioned in my lease termination. I couldn't stay another night. Sarah wrote down every detail, her hands shaking as she realized how closely David's experience matched what she and James were beginning to encounter. "Mr. Chen, did you ever see the children?" "Actually see them?" "Once," he admitted, "my last night in the house. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of crying. Not adult crying, a child sobbing like their heart was broken. I followed the sound downstairs to the living room, and there was a little boy, maybe 3 years old, sitting on the floor where the toys always appeared. He was wearing pajamas from the 1950s, and he was crying for his mommy. When I stepped into the room, he looked right at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen. What did you do? I tried to talk to him, to ask if he needed help, but the moment I spoke, he vanished, just gone, like he'd never been there. But Sarah, I could still hear him crying. Somewhere in that house, that little boy was still crying for his mother. David's description of the child matched the toddler in the Hartwell family portrait. Michael, the youngest, who would have been 3 years old when the family disappeared. Mr. Chen, in your opinion, what happened to those children? I think they're trapped in that house somehow. Not dead exactly, but not alive either. Caught between worlds, unable to leave, unable to find peace. And Sarah, I think they're waiting for someone to help them. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her car outside the records office, processing David Chen's account. The pattern was becoming clear. The Hartwell children were still in the house, visible to those who stayed long enough to see them, desperately trying to communicate their need for help. The sealed box wasn't just containing their voices, it was their prison, created by parents who had tried to protect them, but instead had condemned them to decades of supernatural imprisonment. Despite everything they'd learned, Sarah and James decided to spend their first night in the house. They told themselves it was practical. They needed to assess the electrical system and plumbing before contractors arrived. But truthfully, they both felt compelled to witness firsthand what David Chen and so many others had experienced. They set up sleeping bags in the living room, where the family portrait had been taken and where David had seen little Michael crying. The sealed box sat on the mantelpiece, its whispers now constant but soft, like children trying not to wake sleeping parents. Around 10 o'clock, as they settled in for the night, the house began to come alive in ways they hadn't expected. Footsteps echoed from the second floor. Not the random creaking of old wood, but the deliberate sounds of children running from room to room. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered. James nodded, sitting up in his sleeping bag. The footsteps were accompanied by voices, muffled but clearly children talking and laughing together. It sounded like a normal evening in a house with young occupants, except the second floor was completely empty. Around midnight, James woke to find Sarah sitting up, staring at something in the corner of the room. Following her gaze, he saw toys scattered across the floor, wooden blocks, a rag doll, and a baseball glove that looked worn but well maintained. "They weren't there when we went to sleep," Sarah said quietly. James approached the baseball glove carefully, noting its unusual preservation. The leather was supple, recently oiled, and bore the faint scent of neat's foot oil, as if someone had been caring for it regularly. The manufacturer's label showed it was a 1970s model, exactly what a 12-year-old boy might have owned in 1978. Inside the glove, written in faded ink, were the initials TH, Tommy Hartwell. Sarah, This glove has been maintained. Someone's been taking care of it for 40 years. As if responding to his observation, the sounds from upstairs changed. The playful voices became more urgent, more purposeful. They could hear what sounded like children moving furniture, as if preparing for something important. They want us to come upstairs, Sarah realized. Against every instinct for self-preservation, they climbed the stairs together, flashlights in hand. The sounds led them to what had been the children's bedrooms, where they found evidence of ongoing habitation that defied explanation. In Tommy's room, baseball cards were arranged on the windowsill in neat rows, all featuring players from the 1970s. The cards were pristine, as if they'd been carefully protected from age and handling. Lisa's room contained drawings scattered across a small desk, crayon pictures of the house, the family, and disturbing images of dark shadows lurking in corners. The drawings appeared fresh, the colors vibrant, as if they'd been created recently. In Michael's nursery, wooden blocks were stacked into an elaborate castle, far too complex for a 3-year-old to construct alone. The construction showed signs of ongoing modification, with new sections added in architectural styles that suggested decades of continuous building. They're still growing up, Sarah whispered in wonder and horror. They're still learning, still playing, still creating. They just can't leave. James picked up one of Lisa's drawings, a picture of the living room, with the hidden compartment beneath the stairs clearly visible and marked with an arrow. At the bottom, in careful child's printing, were the words, "This is where Mama hid our voices." The drawing revealed what the sealed box truly contained, not the children themselves, but their ability to communicate with the living world. Their parents had tried to hide their voices, perhaps believing that silence would protect them from whatever threatened the family. As they examined the evidence of the children's ongoing presence, the house around them seemed to exhale with relief. The whispers from the sealed box grew louder, more distinct, as if the children were finally able to make themselves heard. "We've been waiting so long," came Tommy's voice, clear as if he were standing beside them. "Mama and Daddy had to go away," Lisa added, her voice carrying the confusion of a 10-year-old trying to understand adult decisions. "But we can't follow them," Michael's younger voice concluded with heartbreaking simplicity. Standing in those preserved bedrooms, surrounded by decades of accumulated evidence of the children's trapped existence, Sarah and James finally understood the magnitude of what had happened. The Hartwell parents hadn't abandoned their children. They'd tried to save them by binding their voices, believing that silence would protect them from whatever evil haunted the house. Instead, they'd created a prison that had held 3 young souls captive for over 40 years. The next morning, Sarah and James sat at their kitchen table, staring at the sealed box with new understanding. After hearing the children's voices so clearly, they knew they couldn't leave them trapped any longer. The wax seal around the box's edges had grown brittle with age, and careful examination revealed it could be opened without destroying whatever lay inside. "Are you sure about this?" James asked, his fingers poised over the ancient wax. Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled. They'd been waiting 40 years for someone to help them. "We can't walk away now." James carefully broke the wax seal, and immediately the whispers stopped entirely. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the constant murmuring had been. Inside the box, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, they found several items that would change everything they thought they knew about the Hartwell family's disappearance. The most significant discovery was a folded letter written in a woman's careful handwriting. The paper was expensive stationery, and the ink had faded to brown but remained legible. At the top, in elegant script, were the words, "For whoever finds this, if you're reading this, then it didn't work." Sarah read aloud from Mary Hartwell's letter. "My name is Mary Hartwell, and I am writing this on September 14th, 1978. The night before, we attempt something that may save our children or damn us all. If you have found this box, then our ritual failed, and my babies are still trapped in this house. When we bought this house in 1952, we knew Edgar Thornfield had died under strange circumstances. But we believed love could overcome any darkness. We were wrong. The entity that Edgar summoned still haunts these rooms, feeding on innocence, growing stronger with each passing year. At first, it was just shadows that moved wrong, cold spots that had no explanation. But as our children grew, it focused on them. Tommy began having nightmares about a dark man who whispered terrible things. Lisa started drawing pictures of shadows with eyes. Little Michael would cry for hours, pointing at empty corners and babbling about the shadow man. We consulted priests, mediums, anyone who might help us understand what we were facing. Mrs. Eleanor Wickham, a practitioner of the old ways, told us the entity was bound to the house but growing stronger. She said it would eventually claim our children's souls unless we could bind it permanently. The ritual she taught us was supposed to trap the entity in a spiritual prison, sealed with our family's combined will and protected by symbols of binding. But something went wrong. In trying to contain the darkness, we accidentally trapped our children's spirits alongside it. Robert and I made the terrible decision to flee, believing that our absence might weaken the binding and allow the children to move on naturally. We were wrong about that too. The only way to free them is to complete the ritual we started, but it requires someone with no blood connection to our family to speak the words of release. If you are reading this, please help them. They are innocent souls caught in our mistake, and they have been prisoners far too long. The letter continued with detailed instructions for a release ritual, including specific words that must be spoken, candles that must be lit in particular positions, and symbols that must be drawn to break the binding that held the children. Beneath the letter, they found other items, 3 small photographs of the children taken just days before the disappearance, a lock of hair from each child, tied with different colored ribbons, and a small silver cross that had belonged to Mary's grandmother. The timing requirements are specific, Sarah said, studying the ritual instructions. It has to be performed during the new moon, when the boundary between worlds is thinnest. James checked his phone calendar. That's tomorrow night. Also in the box was a hand-drawn map of the house showing the exact positions where candles must be placed and symbols drawn. The ritual would need to be performed in the basement, in the same space where the original binding had been created. There's something else, Sarah said, finding a final note tucked beneath everything else. This one was written in a child's careful printing. We forgive Mama and Daddy. We understand they were scared. Please help us find them. The note was signed with 3 names: Tommy, Lisa, and Michael. As Sarah read those words aloud, a warmth filled the room, and they both felt a presence, not threatening but grateful. The children had been listening, understanding, and forgiving their parents for 40 years of imprisonment. We have to try, James said simply. Sarah nodded, gathering Mary's instructions and the ritual components. Tomorrow night, under the new moon, they would attempt to right a 4-decade-old wrong and finally set the Hartwell children free to find their parents in whatever realm awaited them beyond this house of shadows. That evening, Sarah found herself drawn to examine the house's original construction more carefully. Mary's letter had mentioned Edgar Thornfield's occult practices, but provided no details about what he had actually done to invite such darkness into his home. If they were going to attempt the release ritual, they needed to understand exactly what they might be unleashing. In the basement, behind a stack of old paint cans left by previous tenants, James discovered something that made his blood run cold. The wall stones in the far corner had been deliberately arranged to conceal a hidden space, and when he carefully removed several loose stones, they revealed a small chamber containing Edgar's personal effects. Among the items was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age but still readable. The entries, dated from 1943 to 1951, documented Edgar's descent from curious amateur spiritualist to something far more dangerous. The earliest entries described typical seances and attempts to contact deceased relatives. Edgar wrote about his grief over losing his wife in childbirth and his desperate desire to communicate with her spirit. But as the months passed, his experiments became increasingly reckless. Sarah read aloud from an entry dated March 15, 1944, made contact with something claiming to be Eleanor, but the voice is wrong. Too eager, too knowing. When I asked it to prove its identity by mentioning our private moments, it spoke of things Eleanor never knew, dark secrets it shouldn't possess. I fear I have contacted something that merely wears her voice like a mask. The entries grew more disturbing as Edgar realized he had attracted the attention of a malevolent entity that fed on grief and desperation. The creature promised to reunite him with his wife if he would only open the door a little wider. James found a collection of burnt diary pages hidden in a metal box within the secret chamber. These fragments, charred around the edges but partially readable, contained Edgar's most dangerous experiments. One fragment read, "The shadow speaks to me now without invitation. It shows me visions of Eleanor, but she begs me to stop, warns me that the thing wearing her face grows stronger with each summoning. I know I should cease these experiments, but I cannot bear the thought of eternal separation." Another fragment described a ritual Edgar had performed to create a permanent gateway between the world of the living and what he called the hungry dark. The ritual involved carving symbols into the foundation stones, spilling his own blood on specific locations, and speaking words in a language he didn't understand, but that the shadow had taught him. October 13th, 1950, read one of the most legible fragments. "The door is open now and I cannot close it. The shadow no longer pretends to be Eleanor. It shows me its true nature, ancient, malevolent, feeding on innocence and purity. It tells me it has been searching for decades for a way into our world, and I have provided the perfect entrance." The final readable entry, dated just weeks before Edgar's death, revealed his growing terror. It whispers about the children who will someday live in this house. It speaks of their dreams, their laughter, their light, and how it will consume all of it. I've tried everything to banish it, but the door I opened cannot be closed. May God forgive me for what I have unleashed. Among the burnt pages, Sarah found Edgar's desperate attempts to research banishment rituals and protective spells. His notes showed he had contacted spiritual advisors, studied ancient texts, and even attempted to destroy his own house to contain the entity he had summoned. But it was the final artifact in Edgar's hidden chamber that revealed the full scope of the horror he had created. Wrapped in oiled cloth was a black obsidian mirror, its surface cracked but still reflecting images that shouldn't exist. When James held the mirror up to the light, instead of showing their reflections, it revealed glimpses of a shadow realm, where formless dark shapes moved with predatory intent. In the mirror's depths, they could see the entity Edgar had summoned, a writhing mass of darkness with eyes like burning coals, reaching toward the world of the living with tendrils of pure malevolence. "This is what the Hartwell children have been trapped with for 40 years, Sarah whispered, understanding now why the parents had been so desperate to protect their family. The entity hadn't just been haunting the house, it had been growing stronger, feeding on the children's trapped energy, waiting for the day when it would be powerful enough to break free from the basement prison and claim the souls it had been promised so long ago. Tomorrow night's ritual wouldn't just free the children, it would either banish the entity forever or give it exactly what it needed to escape into the world. The next day was the new moon, and Sarah and James spent the morning gathering materials for the release ritual, according to Mary Hartwell's precise instructions. They needed white candles, sea salt, sage for burning, and most importantly, they needed to understand exactly how to perform the ceremony without making the same mistakes that had trapped the children. 40 years ago, Sarah spread Mary's handwritten ritual diagram across their kitchen table, studying every detail of the complex pattern that needed to be created in the basement. The diagram showed precise measurements and specific symbols that had to be drawn in exact positions around the original binding circle. The positioning has to be perfect, Sarah noted. comparing Mary's diagram to her architectural measurements of the basement. Each candle represents one of the children, and they have to be placed at the exact points where their energy was bound to the house. James had been studying the written instructions, which were far more complex than either of them had initially realized. The ritual required them to speak the children's names in a specific order, while breaking the original binding symbols that had been carved into the foundation stones. "Sarah, look at this part," he said, pointing to a section of Mary's notes. "It says the ritual must be performed by someone who has formed an emotional connection with the children, but shares no blood relationship with the family. That's why the parents couldn't do it themselves." The instructions also warned about the entity that had been trapped alongside the children. The ritual would weaken all the bindings in the house simultaneously, which meant they would need to complete the release ceremony before the malevolent shadow could break free from its own prison. Around noon, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Professor Margaret Stone, a paranormal researcher from the State University who had heard about their situation through Mrs. Cross at the Historical Society. "I've been researching the Hartwell case for years," Professor Stone explained. "Mrs. Cross thought you might need expert guidance for what you're planning to attempt tonight. They agreed to meet at the house that afternoon, and Professor Stone arrived carrying a leather satchel filled with research materials and protective implements. She was a woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair and the intense focus of someone who had spent decades studying phenomena that most people refuse to acknowledge. "I've been waiting for someone brave enough to attempt this ritual," she said, examining Mary's instructions with professional interest. "But I need to warn you about the risks involved." Professor Stone pulled out her own diagram, far more detailed than Mary's original notes. This version showed additional protective measures that could help contain the entity while they worked to free the children. "The Hartwell parents made one critical error," she explained. "They tried to bind the children's spirits to protect them from the entity, but they used the same binding circle for both purposes. This created a shared prison that trapped innocent and malevolent forces together." Her diagram showed how to create separate containment areas, one to hold the entity while they worked, and another to provide the children with a safe pathway to freedom. "We'll need additional materials," Professor Stone said, consulting her list. "Iron filings to create a barrier around the entity's containment area, blessed water from a consecrated source, and most importantly, we need something that belonged to each child to anchor their individual release." James realized they already had what they needed. Tommy's baseball glove, Lisa's drawings, and the wooden blocks from Michael's room would serve as the personal anchors required for the ritual. As evening approached, they prepared the basement according to both Mary's original diagram and Professor Stone's enhanced safety measures. The ritual circle was drawn with chalk and salt. Candles were positioned at precise intervals, and iron filings created a secondary barrier around the area where Edgar's original summoning had taken place. The most crucial element was the timing. The ritual had to begin exactly at midnight, when the new moon's influence would be strongest and the barriers between worlds would be thinnest. "Remember," Professor Stone cautioned as they made final preparations, "once we begin, we cannot stop until it's completed. The entity will fight to prevent the children's release because their trapped energy has been feeding it for decades. If we fail tonight, it may become powerful enough to break free on its own." At 11:45 p.m., they descended into the basement with their materials, the children's artifacts, and the desperate hope that 40 years of imprisonment was finally coming to an end. At exactly midnight, they lit the first candle and began the release ritual. The basement immediately filled with a presence so intense that the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Sarah spoke the opening words from Mary's instructions, while James and Professor Stone maintained the protective circles with salt and iron filings. "We call upon the spirits of Thomas, Lisa and Michael Hartwell, bound against their will by love, turned to imprisonment, seeking freedom to find their eternal rest. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The children's voices filled the basement, no longer whispered but clear and strong, speaking for the first time in decades without the barrier of the sealed box. "We're here," Tommy's voice called out, and suddenly they could see him, a translucent 12-year-old boy, standing near the stairs, wearing the same clothes from the 1975 family portrait. "We've been waiting so long," Lisa added, materializing beside her brother, her 10-year-old face filled with hope and exhaustion. But it was little Michael's appearance that nearly broke their hearts. The 3-year-old stood between his siblings, clutching something in his ghostly hands, an ancient iron key that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy. "This opens the bad place," Michael said in his small voice, holding up the key. "The Shadow Man lives in the bad place." Professor Stone's eyes widened as she recognized the significance of the key. "That's not just any key," she whispered urgently. "It's a binding key, forged specifically to lock spiritual doorways. The children have been protecting it all these years. As if summoned by the mention of its prison, the entity in Edgar's hidden chamber began to stir. The basement walls trembled, and a sound like grinding stone echoed from the direction of Edgar's secret summoning room. "We need to work faster," Professor Stone said, consulting Mary's instructions. "The ritual is weakening all the bindings simultaneously. We have maybe 10 minutes before that thing breaks free." Sarah continued with the release ceremony, speaking each child's name while lighting their individual candles. But as she worked, the entity's influence grew stronger. Shadows began moving independently of their light sources, and a voice like winter wind began whispering threats and promises from the darkness. "You cannot release them," the entity hissed, its voice seeming to come from every direction at once. "They are mine by right of binding. I have fed on their innocence for 40 years, and I will not be denied my sustenance." Tommy stepped forward, his young face showing courage beyond his years. "You never owned us. Our parents made a mistake, but they were trying to protect us from you." The entity's laughter was like breaking glass. "Their protection became your prison, boy. And now these fools will either complete your binding permanently or release me to claim what I have always deserved." James realized what the entity meant. If they failed in the ritual, the children would be trapped forever. But if they succeeded in breaking the binding without proper precautions, they might free the entity as well. "Michael," Professor Stone called to the youngest child. "The key you're holding, where does it belong?" Little Michael pointed toward the far corner of the basement, where Edgar's secret chamber lay, hidden behind loose stones. "It locks the door to where the Shadow Man came from." Understanding flooded through Professor Stone. The key wasn't just a binding tool, it was the original lock on Edgar's gateway to the Shadow Realm. The entity had been trying to get the children to destroy the key for decades, but they had protected it, knowing instinctively that it was the only thing preventing the creature from returning to full power. "We need to use the key to seal the gateway permanently," she told Sarah and James, "but we can only do it after the children are free. If we try to lock the entity away while they're still bound to it, we'll trap them forever." The shadows in the basement were growing more aggressive, reaching toward their protective circles with tendrils of pure darkness. The entity was growing stronger as the ritual progressed, feeding on the spiritual energy being released. "Hurry!" Lisa urged, her ghostly form beginning to flicker as the binding weakened. "We can feel ourselves fading. If you don't free us soon, we might not have enough strength left to help you stop it." Sarah spoke the final words of the release ritual, and the basement exploded with light as 40 years of spiritual imprisonment finally began to break apart. As the binding circle shattered with brilliant light, the malevolent entity revealed itself in all its terrifying glory. The shadows in the basement coalesced into a writhing mass of darkness that towered above them, its form constantly shifting between human-like shapes and something far more ancient and alien. James instinctively reached for Edgar's cracked obsidian mirror, which had been lying among their ritual materials. The moment his fingers touched its surface, the mirror blazed with dark fire, showing not just reflections, but glimpses of the shadow realm from which the entity had originally emerged. "You think that broken glass can harm me?" The entity snarled, its voice like grinding stone. "I have grown strong on the children's light for 40 years. I'm no longer the weak thing that Edgar summoned in his grief." But Professor Stone understood what James had grasped instinctively. "The mirror isn't just Edgar's summoning tool," she shouted over the entity's roar. "It's a window between worlds. We can use it to send this thing back where it came from." The entity lunged toward them, its shadow tendrils reaching for Sarah as she completed the final words of the children's release. But Tommy, Lisa, and Michael stepped between the creature and the living humans, their spirits blazing with protective light. "You cannot touch them," Tommy declared, his 12-year-old voice carrying power beyond his years. "We have been your prisoners, but we were never your servants. Our light was never yours to claim." The entity recoiled from the children's combined spiritual energy, but its retreat was tactical rather than fearful. "Clever children," it hissed. "But you are weak from decades of imprisonment. How long can you maintain that light before it flickers and dies?" Sarah realized the horrible truth. The children were using their remaining spiritual energy to protect the living, but every moment of confrontation was draining what little strength they had left after 40 years of captivity. "The mirror," she called to James. "Can you see the pathway back to its realm?" James held Edgar's obsidian mirror at different angles, watching the images shift and change within its cracked surface. The mirror showed glimpses of the shadow realm, a place of eternal twilight where formless beings drifted through landscapes of mist and despair. "I can see it," he said. "There's a doorway, but it's partially closed. Something is blocking the passage." Professor Stone consulted her research notes frantically. Edgar's original summoning created a one-way passage. The entity could come through, but the doorway sealed behind it. "That's why it's been trapped in our world all these years." Little Michael stepped forward, still clutching the iron key. "The key opens doors both ways," he said with the simple wisdom of a child. "It can make the bad door open, so the Shadow Man can go home." The entity's attention snapped to Michael with predatory focus. "Give me that key, child, and I will release you from all bindings. You can join your parents in whatever realm awaits beyond death." "Don't listen to it, Michael," Lisa warned. "It's been lying to us for 40 years. But Michael approached the mirror with determination beyond his 3 years. "I'm not giving the key to the Shadow Man," he said clearly. "I'm using it to send him away." The youngest Hartwell child pressed the iron key against the surface of Edgar's obsidian mirror, and immediately the cracked glass began to resonate with otherworldly energy. The images within the mirror shifted, showing the Shadow Realm's doorway beginning to reopen. The entity realized what was happening and attacked with desperate fury. But the 3 children formed a protective barrier around Michael as he worked. Their combined light created a shield that the creature could not penetrate, though the effort was clearly exhausting their remaining spiritual energy. "The doorway is opening," James reported, watching the mirror's images change. "But we need to force the entity through before the children's strength fails completely." Professor Stone pulled out a vial of blessed water and began chanting words in Latin, an ancient banishment ritual that would compel the entity to return to its original realm. Once the pathway was fully opened, the basement filled with conflicting energies as spiritual light battled primordial darkness, while Michael's iron key slowly turned in the lock of Edgar's mirror, reopening the doorway between worlds that had been sealed for over 70 years. The moment Michael's iron key completed its turn in the obsidian mirror, a vortex of swirling darkness opened within the cracked glass. The Shadow Realm's doorway gaped wide, and immediately a powerful suction began pulling the entity toward its original prison. "No!" the creature roared, its form fragmenting as it fought against the dimensional pull. "I will not return to that place of endless hunger and emptiness." I have tasted the light of this world, and I will not be denied. But Professor Stone's banishment chant, combined with the children's protective light and the reopened gateway, created forces the entity could not resist. Its shadow tendrils began stretching toward the mirror as the vortex drew it inexorably back to the realm from which Edgar had summoned it decades ago. As the entity was pulled toward banishment, something extraordinary happened. A small object fell from its dissolving form and clattered onto the basement floor, a simple gold wedding ring that gleamed with restored luster, as if decades of tarnish had been instantly cleaned away. Sarah recognized it immediately from the family photographs. "That's Mary Hartwell's wedding ring," she gasped. Tommy's spirit brightened with joy. "Mama's ring! She lost it the night we tried to hide from the Shadow Man. She cried because she thought it meant something bad would happen to our family." Lisa nodded eagerly. "She said the ring was blessed by our grandmother and would always protect us as long as we stayed together." Little Michael clapped his hands as the ring continued to glow with warm, protective light. Mama's love came back. The Shadow Man couldn't keep it anymore. Professor Stone understood the significance immediately. The entity had been feeding on the ring's protective energy for 40 years, using the family's love against them. But now that the binding is broken and the creature is being banished, the ring is returning to its true purpose. The wedding ring's restoration was more than symbolic. It was proof that the corruption the entity had brought to the house was finally being cleansed. The love that had originally blessed the ring was stronger than the darkness that had temporarily claimed it. As the entity's form continued to dissolve, drawn inexorably into the Shadow Realm's vortex, it made one final desperate attempt to escape banishment. Instead of fighting the pull, it suddenly lunged toward the children, trying to drag them through the gateway as well. "If I cannot remain in this world of light," it snarled, "then I will take you with me to ensure my eventual return." But the moment the entity touched the space around the children, Mary's wedding ring flared with brilliant golden light. The protective blessing that had been intended to safeguard the Hartwell family finally activated at full strength, creating a barrier of pure love that the creature could not cross. "The ring protects them," Sarah whispered in wonder, watching as the golden light enveloped all three children like a warm embrace. The entity's scream of frustration echoed through both the basement and the Shadow Realm as it was finally pulled completely through the mirror's gateway. The moment its form disappeared into the swirling vortex, Michael's iron key automatically turned again, sealing the doorway permanently. The obsidian mirror cracked completely in half and went dark, its surface now reflecting only normal images. The gateway to the Shadow Realm was closed forever, and the malevolent presence that had haunted the house for over 70 years was finally banished. In the sudden silence that followed, the three children stood transformed. No longer flickering spirits drained by decades of imprisonment, they glowed with the warm light of souls, finally free to continue their eternal journey. "We can go now," Tommy said, his young face radiant with peace. "We can find Mama and Daddy." Lisa picked up her mother's wedding ring, and it passed through her ghostly fingers to land in Sarah's palm. "Please keep this safe," she asked, "so people will remember that love is stronger than any darkness." Michael approached Sarah and James, his 3-year-old face serious with important purpose. "Thank you for helping us go home. The house will be happy now. No more Shadow Man, no more scared children." The golden light around the children grew brighter, and they began to fade, not disappearing into nothingness, but transitioning to wherever souls find peace after earthly struggles end. "Tell everyone we're okay now," Tommy called as their forms became translucent. "Tell them we found our way to Mama and Daddy." And then they were gone, leaving behind only the warm scent of their mother's perfume and the gentle echo of children's laughter, finally freed from 40 years of supernatural imprisonment. 3 weeks after the liberation ritual, Sarah and James stood in the same living room where they had first seen the family portrait. But everything had changed. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed on the house for decades was completely gone, replaced by something they had never expected to feel in this place: warmth, peace, and the gentle presence of a home that finally welcomed its inhabitants. The renovation work had resumed with remarkable smoothness. Problems that had seemed insurmountable before the ritual now resolved easily. The electrical system that had been mysteriously faulty worked perfectly. The plumbing that had shown signs of decay proved to be in excellent condition. And the structural issues they had worried about turned out to be far less serious than initially assessed. "It's like the house is helping us restore it," James observed, examining wood trim that seemed to be self-healing. Returning to its original beauty as they worked, Sarah nodded, setting down her camera after taking a photograph in the exact spot where the 1975 Hartwell family portrait had been taken. This time the image showed only her and James, standing together in clear, natural light with no mysterious shadows or unexplained figures in the background. The new family portrait they had just taken would serve as proof that the house's dark history had finally ended. And like the haunted images from the past, this photograph radiated normalcy and hope, a young couple beginning their life together in a home that could finally offer the peace it had always been meant to provide, Professor. Stone had visited the previous week to document the aftermath of their successful ritual. She had brought sophisticated electromagnetic equipment to measure spiritual activity, and her readings confirmed what they could all feel. The house was completely clear of supernatural presence. "I've never seen such a complete transformation," she had told them, reviewing her instrument's data. "Whatever malevolent energy was trapped here has been entirely eliminated. This house is now spiritually neutral, free to be shaped by whatever love and intention its new inhabitants bring to it." The children's bedrooms, which had been preserved in supernatural stasis for 40 years, had gradually returned to normal empty rooms. The toys that had appeared nightly were gone. The drawings that refreshed themselves had faded to blank paper, and the elaborate block castles had quietly dismantled themselves as their young architects finally found peace. But the house retained positive traces of the children's presence. The baseball area in the backyard seemed particularly suited for sports activities. The window seat in the front parlor had perfect natural lighting for reading, and the nursery upstairs had an atmosphere of gentle warmth that would make it ideal for future children. Mrs. Cross from the Historical Society had visited to record their experiences for the town's official records. She was relieved to finally close the file on the Hartwell family's disappearance, updating the records to reflect that the children's spirits had been successfully helped to find peace. "This house has been a source of sadness for our community for over 40 years, she had said, examining Sarah's new family portrait. "Seeing it filled with life and hope again is exactly what Millfield needed." The sealed box that had contained the children's voices now sat empty on their mantelpiece, repurposed as a simple decorative item. Occasionally, Sarah would notice it and remember the whispered pleas for help that had started their entire journey. But now the silence from within was peaceful rather than ominous. Mary's wedding ring, which had played such a crucial role in the children's protection during the banishment ritual, had found a place of honor in their home. Sarah wore it on a chain around her neck, not as her own wedding jewelry, but as a reminder that love's protective power could transcend even death and supernatural imprisonment. James had carefully preserved Tommy's baseball glove, Lisa's drawings, and Michael's wooden blocks. These artifacts would eventually be donated to the town's memorial for the Hartwell family, ensuring that the children would be remembered not as tragic victims, but as brave souls who had protected others, even while trapped themselves. The house had taught them both valuable lessons about the persistence of love, the importance of helping others find peace, and the way that confronting darkness with courage and compassion could transform even the most hopeless situations. As evening settled around them, Sarah and James sat together in their living room, planning the final stages of their renovation project and discussing their hopes for the future they would build in this house that had finally become a true home. 6 months after the children's liberation, Sarah and James had come to understand that their house was more than just a building that had been cleared of supernatural presence. It was a place that had been fundamentally transformed by their experience of confronting and overcoming darkness with love and courage. The renovation was nearly complete, but they had made decisions that honored the house's complex history rather than simply erasing it. The hidden compartment beneath the stairs had been restored and preserved, not as a hiding place for supernatural artifacts, but as a time capsule for future owners who might want to understand the complete story of their home. Inside the newly cleaned compartment, they had placed a comprehensive collection of documents, photographs, and artifacts that told the entire story of the house on Maple Street. There were copies of Edgar Thornfield's death certificate and the fragments of his journal that revealed his tragic summoning of the malevolent entity, the newspaper article about the Hartwell family's disappearance, and David Chen's rental application with his handwritten note about the children's presence. Most importantly, they had included their own account of the liberation ritual, complete with Professor Stone's research and detailed instructions for any future supernatural intervention that might become necessary. They had learned that knowledge and preparation were the most powerful tools for protecting innocent people from otherworldly threats. Sarah carefully placed the final item in their time capsule, a letter they had written together, addressed to whoever might discover this collection in years to come. To the future inhabitants of this house, we are Sarah and James Mitchell, and we lived here from 2024 to left blank for future completion. When we bought this house, we discovered it held the trapped spirits of 3 children who had been prisoners here for over 40 years. Through courage, compassion, and the help of experts in supernatural phenomena, we were able to free these children and banish the malevolent entity that had threatened them. This house is now completely safe and has been spiritually cleansed. The children, Tommy, Lisa, and Michael Hartwell, found peace and were reunited with their parents in whatever realm awaits beyond this life. The dark entity that Edgar Thornfield accidentally summoned in the 1940s has been permanently banished to its original dimension. We share this story not to frighten, but to ensure that the truth is preserved. This house was never truly evil. It was wounded, and it needed healing. Sometimes places, like people, require help to overcome trauma and find peace. We have been honored to be the ones who helped this house transform from a place of supernatural imprisonment to a home of love and safety. We hope you will find as much happiness here as we have, and we trust that the love we have poured into these walls will continue to bless all who live here in years to come. If you ever encounter anything unusual or concerning, do not hesitate to seek help from qualified professionals who understand supernatural phenomena. Knowledge, courage, and love are always stronger than fear and darkness. May this house bring you joy, peace, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living in a place where good has triumphed over evil. James sealed the time capsule with weather-resistant materials and placed it carefully in the restored hiding place. They had also created a simple plaque for the compartment that read, "Time Capsule Placed. 2024. The complete story of this house's healing." Their architect friends had initially suggested simply sealing the hidden compartment permanently, but Sarah and James felt strongly that future owners deserved to know the truth about their home's history. Transparency and education were better protections than secrecy and ignorance. The house itself seemed to approve of their decision. The restoration work had revealed beautiful original features that had been hidden for decades. Intricate wood carvings, stained glass windows, and built-in bookcases that suggested the house had always been meant to be a place of learning and growth. It's like the house is showing us its true personality now that it's free from the entity's influence, Sarah observed, running her hand along newly discovered decorative molding that had been concealed behind decades of paint. James nodded, understanding what she meant. The house felt alive in the best possible way, not haunted, but inhabited by the accumulated love and positive energy of everyone who had worked to heal it. Their time capsule would ensure that this story of transformation would never be lost, serving as both historical record and guide for anyone who might face similar challenges in the future. 1 year after the liberation ritual, the Millfield community gathered to officially recognize the transformation of the house on Maple Street. What had once been known as the haunted Hartwell Place was now celebrated as a symbol of how courage and compassion could overcome even the darkest supernatural threats. The ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning, with Mrs. Cross from the Historical Society presenting Sarah and James with an official certificate that would become part of the town's permanent records. The document, printed on high-quality parchment with the town seal, formally acknowledged their role in resolving one of Millfield's oldest mysteries. By the authority vested in the Millfield Historical Society and with the blessing of our community, Mrs. Cross read aloud, "We hereby certify that this house has been cleansed of all supernatural disturbances and is recognized as a place of healing and redemption rather than haunting. The house blessing certificate represented more than just official recognition. It was a document that would protect future property values and ensure that potential buyers would know they were purchasing a home with a positive resolution to its troubled history." Father Michael O'Brien from St. Catherine's Church had performed the formal blessing ceremony the previous week, sprinkling holy water in every room and offering prayers of gratitude for the peaceful resolution of the children's long imprisonment. The blessing had been comprehensive, acknowledging both the tragedy that had occurred and the triumph that had followed. "This house stands as proof that no darkness is permanent," Father O'Brien had said during the ceremony. "Where there was once fear, there is now peace. Where there was once imprisonment, there is now freedom. Where there was once despair, there is now hope." The local newspaper had run a feature story about the supernatural resolution, carefully written to inform the community without sensationalizing the events. The article focused on the importance of seeking proper help when facing unexplained phenomena and highlighted the cooperation between scientific research and spiritual intervention that had made the successful outcome possible. Professor Stone had contributed a sidebar article explaining the academic approach to paranormal investigation, emphasizing that legitimate supernatural events required serious study and professional intervention rather than amateur attempts that could make situations worse. The Mitchell family's success came from their willingness to research the situation thoroughly, seek expert guidance, and approach the problem with both courage and respect for the spirits involved, she had written. Their experience demonstrates that supernatural problems can be resolved safely when proper protocols are followed. The certificate also served practical purposes for Sarah and James. Their homeowner's insurance company had initially been skeptical about covering a property with a documented history of supernatural activity, but the official blessing certificate and Professor Stone's scientific documentation had convinced them that the issues had been permanently resolved. Real estate professionals in the area now appointed to the Maple Street house as an example of how properly addressing supernatural issues could actually increase property values rather than diminish them. The house had become a local landmark, not for its haunted history, but for its successful transformation. Several other families in Millfield, who had been dealing with unexplained phenomena in their own homes, had reached out to Sarah and James for advice. They had become informal consultants, helping connect troubled homeowners with qualified professionals like Professor Stone, who could assess and address supernatural problems. "We've learned that ignoring these situations doesn't make them go away," Sarah explained to one worried family. But facing them with the right knowledge and support can lead to outcomes that are better than anyone imagined. The blessing certificate hung in their front hall, where visitors could see it immediately upon entering. The document served as both a conversation starter and a source of comfort. For guests who might have heard stories about the house's troubled past, James had framed the certificate alongside the new family portrait and a photograph of the 3 Hartwell children taken from the old family pictures. The display honored both the house's healing and the memory of the children who had finally found peace. Local children often walked by the house on their way to school, and instead of crossing the street to avoid it as previous generations had done, they now waved at Sarah and James working in the garden. The house had become a normal part of the neighborhood again, integrated into the community's daily life, rather than standing apart as a place to be. Feared, the certificate represented the final step in the house's transformation from supernatural prison to blessed home. Official recognition that love and courage had triumphed over darkness and fear. 2 years after moving into the house on Maple Street, Sarah stood in what had once been Lisa Hartwell's bedroom, now converted into a bright nursery filled with afternoon sunlight. The room that had been frozen in supernatural time for 40 years was finally preparing to welcome new life and the sound of children's laughter. The transformation was complete, but Sarah and James had been careful to honor the room's history while preparing for their own family's future. The window seat where Lisa had loved to read remained, now equipped with soft cushions and surrounded by children's books that would someday be read to their own daughter. On the windowsill sat a special artifact that connected past and future, Tommy's baseball, discovered in the garden 6 months earlier during their spring landscaping project. The baseball was in perfect condition despite decades in the soil, its leather pristine and its stitching intact, as if it had been waiting patiently for the right moment to resurface. James had found the baseball while planting roses in what had been the children's play area behind the house. The moment he'd brushed the dirt away, they both understood its significance. This was Tommy's most treasured possession, the baseball he'd been playing with in the photographs they'd found in the hidden compartment, unlike the other artifacts that had been preserved through supernatural means. This baseball felt completely natural and normal. There was no otherworldly energy surrounding it, no whispered voices or mysterious properties. It was simply a well-made baseball from the 1970s that had somehow survived the elements to emerge at exactly the right time. "It's like Tommy left it for us to find when we were ready," Sarah had said when James brought it inside. "A gift from the past to bless our future." They had initially planned to donate the baseball to the youth center, along with Tommy's glove. But something about the timing of its discovery felt too meaningful to ignore. The baseball had emerged from the earth just as they were beginning to prepare for their first child, as if the house itself was offering a blessing on the new family being created within its walls. Professor Stone had examined the baseball and confirmed that it held no supernatural residue whatsoever. "This is just a normal baseball now," she had told them. "Whatever spiritual energy it might have carried has been completely released. It's a purely natural object with sentimental value." Sarah placed the baseball on a special shelf in the nursery where their daughter would be able to see it as she grew up. They planned to tell her the story of the brave children who had once lived in their house, how they had protected others even while trapped themselves, and how their courage had helped transform a place of fear into a home of love. The baseball would serve as a tangible connection to that story, a reminder that the room where their daughter would sleep had once belonged to children who had faced unimaginable challenges with extraordinary bravery. Lisa, Tommy, and Michael's legacy would live on not as a tale of supernatural terror, but as an inspiring example of how love and protection could transcend even death. Mrs. Cross had visited when they found the baseball, and she had smiled with deep satisfaction when she saw it displayed in the nursery. And those children would be so happy to know that their room will hear the sound of a baby's laughter again, she had said. This house was always meant to be filled with young voices and growing families. The baseball represented the final piece of the house's healing journey. Every supernatural element had been resolved. Every trapped spirit had found peace, and every malevolent influence had been banished. What remained was a normal, blessed home, ready to nurture new generations of families. As Sarah felt her daughter moving within her, she spoke softly to the life growing inside her about the house that would be her first home. She told her about the brave children who had once lived here, about the importance of helping others even when afraid, and about how love could overcome any darkness. The baseball on the shelf seemed to absorb these words. No longer a relic of supernatural imprisonment, but a symbol of hope passed from one generation of children to the next. Tommy Hartwell's treasured possession would watch over a new little girl who would grow up in safety and love, protected by the sacrifice and courage of the children who had come before her. Their daughter would be born into a house where good had triumphed over evil, where love had proven stronger than fear, and where the future stretched ahead, bright with promise and possibility. On a warm spring morning 3 years after they had first discovered the hidden compartment beneath the stairs, Sarah gave birth to their daughter in the master bedroom of the house on Maple Street. The room that had once been Robert and Mary Hartwell's sanctuary was now filled with the sounds of new life and overwhelming joy. The birth certificate, filled out by Dr. Susan Martinez, who had become both their family physician and close friend, recorded the details that would forever connect their daughter to this special place. Emma Rose Mitchell, born May 15, 2027, at 3:17 a.m. at home on Maple Street, Millfield. The document was more than just a legal record. It was proof that the house had completed its journey from supernatural prison to blessed sanctuary, where once there had been trapped children crying for their parents. There was now a healthy baby surrounded by love and protected by the accumulated positive energy of everyone who had worked to heal this place. Emma had been born in the same room where Mary Hartwell had once hidden in terror from supernatural threats, but now that space radiated only peace and safety. The master bedroom's tall windows let in morning sunlight that illuminated a scene of pure happiness. A healthy mother, a proud father, and a perfect baby girl, taking her first breaths in a house that had finally fulfilled its original purpose as a family home. James held his daughter for the first time while Sarah rested, and he found himself speaking softly to Emma about the house that would be her first home. "You're going to grow up in a very special place, little one," he whispered. "This house has seen sadness and joy, darkness and light, but it's been waiting for you to fill it with laughter again." Dr. Martinez had been fascinated by the opportunity to deliver a baby in the house where she had helped resolve one of the community's most enduring mysteries. "There's something wonderfully symbolic about new life beginning where old trauma has been healed," she had said during Sarah's labor. "This baby is being born into a house that understands the power of love to overcome any obstacle." The birth certificate would join the other significant documents in their family records: the house deed, the blessing certificate, and the time capsule they had created to preserve the complete story. Emma's birth represented the final chapter in the house's transformation, proof that places touched by supernatural events could indeed return to normal, healthy function. Mrs. Cross visited 3 days after Emma's birth, bringing a gift from the Millfield Historical Society, a bound copy of the complete documented history of the house, from Edgar Thornfield's original construction, through the Hartwell family's tragedy to Sarah and James's successful resolution of the supernatural crisis. "Your daughter is the first child to be born in this house since the 1950s. Mrs. Cross told them, admiring baby Emma. "She represents a new beginning, not just for your family, but for this entire property. The cycle of sadness has finally been broken. Professor Stone had also sent congratulations along with her final research report on the house's supernatural activity. Her electromagnetic readings over the past 3 years had consistently shown normal, healthy energy patterns with no trace of paranormal presence. Emma is being born into a house that is spiritually neutral and energetically clean, Professor Stone had written. Whatever negative influences once affected this property have been completely eliminated. Your daughter will grow up in a normal, safe environment, blessed by the knowledge that good has triumphed over evil in her family home. The birth certificate would eventually hang in Emma's nursery alongside Tommy's baseball and a framed copy of the Hartwell children's family portrait. Emma would grow up knowing the story of the brave children who had once lived in her house, understanding from an early age that courage and compassion were the most powerful forces in the world. As evening settled around them on Emma's first day of life, Sarah and James sat together in their living room, the same space where the Hartwell family portrait had been taken, where they had first heard the children's whispered pleas for help, and where they had made the decision to risk everything to help trapped souls find peace. Now that room was filled with the soft sounds of a contented baby and the quiet conversation of parents planning their daughter's future in a house that had finally become what it was. Always meant to be, a place where children could grow up safely, surrounded by love, and protected by the knowledge that some stories really do have happy endings. Emma Rose. Mitchell's birth certificate marked not just the beginning of her life, but the completion of her house's transformation from supernatural prison to blessed family home.